This is an NBC Charlotte special report.
Coal ash ponds next door to drinking water. Wells testing positive for a cancer-causing chemical.
If you look at my land, my well, my location to the coal ash pond, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. I mean, come on.
Neighbors worry it's already making them sick.
4 houses in a row we've had brain tumors here.
Duke Energy and the state do their own testing. Duke denies any problem.
Their water supplies are very safe.
The continuing coal ash controversy on a special edition of Flashpoint.
WCNC TV Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered. Now, this week's host, Stuart Watson.
Good morning and thanks for joining us. I'm Stuart Watson. We're out here on Mountain Island Lake because this is the source of most of Charlotte's drinking water. In fact, if you live in all of Mecklenburg and Gaston counties, chances are this is where your water comes from. But there's also another neighbor here, coal ash ponds, as there are in many of the lakes and streams around North Carolina. And that causes problems. So for the next half hour, we're not just going to talk about the pollution, we're also going to talk about some solutions. Coal ash is leaking into the groundwater and surface water around our state. It contains a variety of toxins, heavy metals, and cancer-causing chemicals, which can be harmful to fish, wildlife, and even humans. Charlotte is in the center of most of the coal ash in the state. 5 of the 14 coal-fired power plants are around our area, and most of the ash. Along the Catawba River, there's the Marshall Steam Station on Lake Norman, Riverbend here on Mountain Island Lake, and the Allen Station on Lake Wiley. To our west, there's the Cliffside Station on the Broad River near Shelby, and to the northeast, the Buck Station near I-85 on the Yadkin River near Salisbury. We want to begin there at Buck because this week we reported that well tests outside the Buck Steam Station found evidence of a cancer-causing agent in the well water.
I grew up on the lake, so water's important to me. Love it.
Sherry Gobble surrounds herself with water from the pond in front of her home.
The water's peaceful, yeah.
To the pond behind her home.
The trees didn't used to be dead like that.
A pond filled with coal ash from Duke Energy's Buck Steam Station. Didn't you know you were living next to a coal ash pond when you moved?
Never really thought about it. Never really thought about it, honestly. Duke has made us all feel like it's okay in this community. We've always heard that they're a good neighbor, and I trusted that. I honestly trusted that, and now I'm questioning that. Questioning
because of what she discovered when the Waterkeepers Alliance tested her drinking water.
She found lead. It was 19 parts per billion. The state, North Carolina state regulation is 15 parts per billion. That may not sound like much, but when you have small children, that's a great concern to me.
Like all her neighbors in the Dukeville community northeast of Salisbury, Sherry's family gets their water from a well in the ground.
The wellhead is right over here.
If you drive down the road from Sherry's, you'll see the same fake rock over and over again in the neighbors' yards. Those fake rocks cover wellheads. Can you see the wellhead? No.
That's what it looks like.
The Riverkeeper found something else in Sherry's water and in her neighbors, a cancer-causing chemical called hexavalent chromium.
Hexavalent chromium is directly from coal ash burning.
When Duke heard about Sherry's test, they started doing their own well water testing in conjunction with the State Department of Environment and Natural Resources, called DENR.
Duke Energy recently completed some neighbor-requested water sampling, and we've been able to determine with an independent lab results that we have no indication that the ash basins are influencing their water supplies. Their water supplies are very safe.
Just one thing. Duke never tested Sherry's well, and they didn't test some other neighbors' wells that were close to the coal ash ponds.
If you look at my land, my well, my location to the coal ash pond, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. I mean, come on.
But Duke insists the water flowing underground from the unlined coal ash ponds here is all moving away from the neighbors' wells and toward the Yadkin River.
We know from our groundwater monitoring results over the last several years that groundwater is heading toward the river and not uphill toward where the neighbors are. We're very pleased to see that this data validates that.
Sherry's well goes down more than 100 feet. That's lower than the pond level. They're saying that everything is moving that way. And that none of this is moving this way.
Well, I hope they're right, but I don't know.
In all of those samples that we've collected, there are no significant exceedances of state groundwater standards.
One thing to note, there is no state standard for hexavalent chromium, the cancer-causing chemical. There's a proposed drinking water standard in California, but no state standard here. Do you trust Duke? Do you trust their numbers?
No, not right now. I feel like Duke is going to do everything they can to protect their interest. I don't feel like they are going to protect mine.
Sherry will not let her kids swim in the pool this year. She won't bathe them in the house. She won't even plant a garden.
I do not feel angry. I do not want to argue about it. I do want something done.
So the woman who loves water is now afraid of it. Even more so when she started talking to her neighbors about cancer. Now, scientists have already studied the neighbors in the Dukeville community because of the instances of brain cancer there. But news this week of seeps that were contaminated flowing onto neighbors' property have raised new concerns.
A lot of good memories.
Ron Thomas was born on this farm in this house.
79 years I've lived here.
A house built before the Civil War. The reason the settler picked this spot.
It was the best water.
But now the Thomases say their home and its well water are under threat.
If you look over there, you can see the water coming out.
Water seeps through the soil from the direction of a coal ash pond next door at Duke Energy's Buck Steam Plant.
Our well is just over 400 feet from the ash pond, which is a very short distance for water to travel.
An environmental group called the Waterkeepers Alliance took samples of these seeps. Lab tests found chromium, a part of coal ash, at almost 10 times the state groundwater standard.
Would you want your family and your children drinking that water? And that's what these families are faced with.
Duke and state regulators took their own samples of well water and they tested water from the Thomases' seeps. But Duke and the state found no chromium over groundwater limits.
This is welcome news for us. We were able to report back very positive results that those folks can be very confident in their water quality. We're not seeing any indication of ash basin influence in that water.
But Duke and the state did not draw their samples directly from the seeps the way the Waterkeeper did, but downstream where the sample could have been diluted.
I'm not, accusing them directly, pointing a finger, but there seems to be some differences.
The Thomases are skeptical because of their family's medical history.
There's been right much sickness in our family.
I've had kidney failure twice and a benign pituitary brain tumor. And 4 houses in a row we've had brain tumors here.
It just doesn't make sense for this small a community to have that much problem.
Terry Butler's son died of a brain tumor before he turned 39. He lived next door to the Thomases and drank well water from an old well that's since run dry.
But you're also walking in it every day, breathing it every day. My children are very small back then. Who knows? Maybe my son got a brain tumor from that. I have no idea. I can't prove it, but it's a shame.
24 years ago, scientists studied the cancer cases around Dukeville, but focused on power lines and found no link.
They didn't check the water at that time.
Ash basins have been around for a very long time, and I am not aware of any studies nationally that are credible studies that show any conclusive link between ash basins and health and carcinogens and any concerns or health effects that have actually
That could just be because we haven't studied.
Well, you're right. I think there is an opportunity for more study.
While the Thomases and their neighbors welcome a cancer cluster study, they want two things even more. They want Duke to pay for fresh drinking water, and they want the coal ash cleaned up.
I would like to trust Duke. I'd like to think that they're a good neighbor. I just hope that they will do the right thing and get these 3 huge ash ponds out of here permanently.
There are options for getting the coal ash away from the water supply permanently, but first it's important to note that these seeps are not some kind of isolated incident, and we'll have that story right after John Wendell has your forecast in the First Warn Storm Center. Now, coal ash is leaking across the state, not just into surface waters like here at Mountain Island Lake, but also into the groundwater, underground. And recent tests of some of those leaks reveal troubling findings.
It looks like it's a pretty good sized stream.
Guy Hutchins spotted it.
Basically sinkholes that has water flow in them.
Sinkholes under a dam holding back old unlined coal ash ponds.
About 10 feet down is a major flow of water.
So NBC Charlotte photojournalist John Gray outfitted a waterproof GoPro video camera with a tiny flashlight and lowered it using a telescoping pole more than 10 feet down the hole. Not a gush, but a steady flow of water running under Guy's property.
The water actually goes underneath this road and comes out down there next to the river.
The Broad River on the Cleveland-Rutherford County line, just downstream of Duke Energy's Cliffside coal plant. A neighbor gave us a lift upstream where you can clearly see the big outfall from Duke's coal ash pond. Duke has a permit for this, but back up the riverbank,
That's the berm off the ash pond right behind us there.
leaks, seepage flowing through the earthen dam called a berm, holding back all that coal ash.
The seepage is basically just at the base of this berm, and some of it's coming, looks like it's leaching from the berm.
So Riverkeeper Hartwell Carson from Asheville sampled the water.
That didn't actually come up high in metals. I think there was a lot of fresh water mixing with any pollution that was there.
But upstream, near some old buried coal ash ponds, he took more samples, and bingo.
There was a lot of flow, and there was a lot of toxicity in that flow.
Carson found pipes sticking out of the riverbank below the earthen dam.
It was 25 times the drinking water standard for arsenic.
Carson mapped his sample sites on Google Earth. The site with the highest arsenic levels were here, just below the spillway near a dried-out coal ash pond.
Just in of itself, discharging any pollution without a permit is against the law. It's against federal law, the Clean Water Act.
At a tour of Cliffside last June, a company spokeswoman assured us Duke abided by all laws.
We're in compliance with ever-increasing state and federal environmental legislation and requirement.
Environmentalists say that's no longer true, even if it was in June.
I think seeps is a little misleading. It appears like maybe that's just a trickle. I wouldn't be surprised if you're seeing several 100,000 gallons a day of this pollution entering the Broad River.
Back at the Broad River, Guy Hutchins is worried about what the sinkhole and the water flowing underground will mean for his road.
Eventually it will probably wash it out.
But he's also worried about the water quality in the Broad River, where he lives and rents out cabins at a retreat called River Mist.
When the rain actually comes over the overflow in that dam, and everything goes just right straight into the river.
So while Guy is concerned about a big gush, a spill like what happened at the Dan River, he's also worried about the steady drip, drip, drip of these smaller leaks like this newest one. There are solutions on the horizon to stop these seeps. We'll talk to the politicians and the experts about the trade-offs involved and look at what some companies are already doing when Flashpoint continues. In the coal ash controversy, one potential solution is using the ash as fill dirt to level out land for construction. Now, Duke Energy has pitched the city of Charlotte on using up to 5 million tons of coal ash from the Riverbend station at the Charlotte Douglas Airport. Duke is already reusing coal ash as fill dirt at the Asheville Airport. Now it wants to do the same thing at the Charlotte Airport. Duke hired a company called Chiraw out of Kentucky, and Chiraw trucks the coal ash to the Asheville Airport and dumps it inside of giant liners to keep the ash from leaking into the groundwater.
But if not there, where? And that's the biggest problem with the coal ash issue, is finding a place to move it and at what cost.
Now Duke wants to move 4 million tons of coal ash from the Riverbend steam station to Charlotte Douglas Airport.
We think this project would be environmentally, scientifically technically and physically sound.
The Catawba Riverkeeper, an environmental group, offered a qualified endorsement.
I think they have a first-rate operation, and I've seen a lot of ash handling operations over the years. But there is going to be some dust.
But Charlotte City Council members still have more questions than answers.
Can I explain to any member of this community that this is the right thing to do, it is the right time to do it, and it's going to be done in a way that's going to keep our community safe?
But an engineer affiliated with UNC Charlotte encourages the city to remain open.
It's been done in many places, and there are studies on this that say it's actually one of the preferential fills if you have a large quantity of excess ash. It's a consistent material.
Well, God knows we have that.
Right.
As an engineer, Chris Hardin has staked his license signing off on the use of what's called structural fill. That is, fill dirt that's wrapped up in a liner in other construction projects. He says the risk of using coal ash at the airport would be minimal since there are no water wells nearby and the coal ash can be locked up.
You can't say that you've done all your due diligence in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. You have to look into it, and there really is a responsibility to work with the local utility.
But a scientist who studied coal ash says those liners can leak.
They're designed to allow a certain amount of leachate and seepage and drainage to go through.
Dennis Limley is a biologist at Wake Forest University.
I've worked with coal ash toxicity to fish and wildlife since 1978.
Dr. Limley found one element in coal ash, selenium, causes birth defects.
The variety of toxic effects is the same whether it's fish, a bird, a mammal, or a human.
He says even though airports install liners, coal ash could leak and enter the groundwater, flowing underground to wells or surface streams.
We don't have any information on the storage characteristics or the performance standards for these fills in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, most of these structural fills and even landfills are unmonitored and unregulated.
If you were talking to the aviation director at Charlotte Douglas or the city manager or the city council, and they said, "What do you think, Doc? Put coal ash out in structured fill, prop up the airport runway? What do you think?"
I would say to stay away from it, just because the risks that we see out there outweigh the benefits in terms of long-term hazard to fish and wildlife.
South Carolina has already started drying out its coal ash ponds and digging up all that ash. We flew over the Waterkeeper plant near Columbia, where SCE&G is ahead of schedule in removing the coal ash from the water side. And we drove to Monk's Corner near Charleston to see firsthand how another power company is making good use of coal ash. This machine is three kinds of green: painted green, environmental green, cash green. The green machine is nothing but three belts and a big screen. It shakes dirt, or in this case coal ash, and separates it into three big piles. One for the big clumps, one for the sticks and roots, and one for the finer ash. A front-end loader scoops up the coal ash and dumps it in a truck that hauls it to a plant that puts this coal ash to good use as cement.
For Santee Cooper, this was a win-win-win situation with the environment, the economy, and for our customers.
Santee Cooper, if you're from Charleston, you might say Cooper, is a state-run electric company in South Carolina. Environmentalists sued Santee Cooper over the coal ash at another coal plant. Santee Cooper didn't just settle that one lawsuit. It started a company-wide program at all of its coal plants to reuse the coal ash.
Nobody is forcing us to do this. It's the right thing to do.
Duke Energy reuses some of its dry coal ash as cement and other building products. The difference at Santee Cooper is that this area used to be a pond, so Santee Cooper is drying out this ash in these piles that look like giant anthills and reusing the coal ash that was once underwater.
If there were standing water in the pond, it would just take a little longer. You would have to allow the material to de-water, but it would be the same end use.
That's important because Duke Energy has dozens of these ponds, including the one that spilled into the Dan River, and ponds that are leaking into Mountain Island Lake and Lake Wylie closer to Charlotte. Another South Carolina electric company called SCE&G has dried out its coal ash and trucked it to lined landfills where it won't leak into the Waterkeeper River. But Santee Cooper found it was cheaper to reuse the ash than to dump it. So the best use of this coal ash isn't to dump it back in the ground, even if it is a lined landfill, but to use it as a building block for cement.
Right now we're using about 80% of the material.
Make no mistake, it still costs the ratepayers to get rid of the coal ash, and it's not quick or cheap.
It's about $250 million over the next 10 to 15 years.
Duke has more than 10 times the volume of coal ash Santee Cooper does. Drying it out and removing the threat of pollution to lakes and rivers is expected to cost more than $1 billion. But Santee Cooper has shown a utility can cut much of that cost by reusing its coal ash and not just burying it. And get this, concrete makers in North Carolina have to import coal ash from South Carolina, even though there's 100 million tons of it in the ground right here. That story in a moment. In the coal ash controversy, one great irony is that while Duke is trying to get rid of coal ash, concrete makers say they can't get enough of it. While North Carolina tries to figure out what to do with 100 million tons of coal ash, one industry can't get enough of the stuff.
We want it, and we need it. We just can't get it.
Henry Batten's president of Concrete Supply Company in Charlotte.
The sand, the stone, put it all together, and that's what batches and makes concrete.
A key ingredient in concrete, coal ash, especially the fine ash called fly ash.
The Duke Energy Building has fly ash in it, has a lot of fly ash in it.
The great irony is the North Carolina concrete industry has to import coal ash from South Carolina when it has an abundance right here.
And that's insane.
And in South Carolina, near Columbia and Charleston, they're already doing it.
It's happening in South Carolina, where they can take those ponds and reclaim them, put them back to their natural state, and are taking that ash, refining it, reprocessing it, and selling it to me.
But the ash can't come straight out of a coal ash pond and into concrete. First, it has to be refined. And North Carolina's not doing enough of that.
I'd love to see North Carolina export ash.
And with the right engineering, it's a possible solution to the coal ash problem.
I mean, I think we can do it.
Engineers tell us that part of the problem is not all the coal ash is the same quality, so some of it's not useful for concrete. So there's not one magic answer. We want to hear what you think. Stay in touch with us through Facebook, Twitter, and email. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Sunday.